You survive a brutal, months-long mountain siege. You run completely out of ammunition. You raise a white flag, step out of your trenches, and formally surrender to a professional army. And then, standing unarmed in a courtyard, you are systematically executed. To understand how this happened, we have to look at the map of early 1948. The Jewish settlement of Kfar Etzion operated as a human shield. It was a completely isolated enclave in the Judean hills, sitting directly on the main highway between Hebron and Jerusalem. That position made it incredibly vulnerable. The moment civil fighting broke out, hostile local militias severed the single narrow mountain road leading into the block. The defenders were trapped behind enemy lines, completely cut off from food, medical supplies, and heavy armor. The defenders managed to hold off local militia attacks for months, but on May 12th, the tactical reality shifted. The Jordanian Arab Legion arrived. This was a professional, British-trained military force, equipped with heavy artillery and mechanized armor. The Legion's artillery barrages systematically dismantled the outer defenses and shattered the kibbutz's internal communication lines. Without field telephones or radios, the fighters at Kfar Etzion could no longer coordinate counterattacks or call for backup from neighboring outposts. By the following morning, the leadership faced a grim mathematical reality. Armored cars had breached the main gates. The defenders hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and their small arms ammunition was effectively gone. Fighting on guaranteed the death of every person inside. Out of options and out of bullets, the isolated garrison made the only choice they had left. They would abandon their defensive positions and place their survival entirely in the hands of the enemy, hoping they would honor the international rules of war. On May 13th, a large white sheet was hastily hoisted over the roof of the central administrative building. Word was passed down into the battered trenches: cease fire immediately. Following orders, approximately 133 exhausted defenders stepped out into the open. They dropped their rifles, abandoned their posts, and lined up against a concrete wall in the central public courtyard. Waiting for them in that courtyard were two vastly different opposing forces. On one side stood the disciplined regular soldiers of the Arab Legion, assigned to secure the perimeter and take prisoners. Surrounding them was an immense, chaotic crowd of thousands of local, irregular militia fighters, driven by months of heavy casualties and a desire for absolute retribution. Despite the volatile crowd, there was a brief, deceptive calm. The Arab Legion regulars maintained control. A local photographer even appeared, telling the prisoners they needed to be documented before being transported to a prisoner of war camp across the Jordan River. According to standard military convention, the battle was over. The garrison laid down its arms, and under the oversight of a professional state army, those unarmed men and women should have been completely safe. Without warning, an individual opened fire on the prisoners with a submachine gun. Survivors recounted the immediate horror. 50 wounded defenders scrambled into the cellar, locking the doors. The mob placed explosive charges against the foundation, bringing the building down on them. Out in the courtyard, any remaining semblance of military discipline evaporated instantly. The massive crowd of irregulars surged forward, swarming the remaining unarmed prisoners with rifles, heavy clubs, and knives. Several professional Arab Legion officers actively tried to intervene. Historical records show they even fired on some of the irregulars to protect the prisoners, but they were entirely overwhelmed by the sheer size and fury of the mob. The slaughter was absolute. Out of the entire garrison standing in the courtyard that morning, only 4 individuals survived the frenzy, either by scrambling into deep rocky crevices or by being physically shielded in the back of an armored car by an enemy officer. The event proved a terrifying reality. The presence of a formal, professional military force guarantees absolutely no protection if they cannot control the undisciplined irregular militias fighting alongside them. 127 unarmed people were murdered that day after formally surrendering to a regular army. Word of the massacre quickly reached the remaining 3 kibbutzim in the Etzion block. Knowing they were completely out of ammo and next in line, their commanders refused to surrender locally. Instead, they bypassed the irregular factions entirely and negotiated a capitulation strictly with the International Committee of the Red Cross. Those people were taken safely as prisoners of war, but their physical settlements were erased. Over the next 48 hours, irregulars looted the equipment, uprooted the orchards, and used dynamite to level every home, until nothing remained but barren rock. The skeletal remains of the victims lay exposed in those ruins for over a year. It wasn't until late 1949, after intense United Nations intervention, that Israel was permitted to recover the bodies. They were brought back to Jerusalem and interred in a massive collective national plot. In his radio address proclaiming the birth of the State of Israel hours after the massacre, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion made a clear historical assessment. The desperate, isolated stand of the Etzion defenders successfully delayed the advancing enemy armies just long enough to save the capital from falling in the opening hours of the war. But the events at Kfar Etzion also cemented a harsh, enduring military doctrine. It demonstrated that irregular militias cannot be trusted, and that laying down your arms without the physical presence of international guarantees is a fatal gamble.